All right, for Udemy students, we're going to cover really quickly insert and update basics. And this is just the syntax. I have this on GitHub. I added this to GitHub just as a quick little example that you can refer to if you get lost from time to time, like, oh, what was it? So this is where it's at, SQL Server Teaching Examples, insert update basics.sql. So you can just play around with it and figure it out. So a lot of SQL Server developers and database administrators, for that matter, they're going to tell you when you're doing inserts and updates, what you should do is use merge. And if you ever go to a Halloween party where there's going to be a bunch of SQL Server developers or database administrators or ETL developers, what you should do to scare them is to dress as either a left join or an inner join, because that'll scare the crap out of them. And the reason is because they're so afraid to use joins, or where not in, which I have no problem with using. You should note that merge has a lot of bugs in it. And I don't remember whether they've corrected that for the newer editions or whether they haven't, but there was a good post I saw one time on Stack Overflow by Aaron Bertrand, who has phenomenal stuff. And he was talking, or he wrote about the bug in merge, and I think it was for 2008 R2, so they may have corrected it. But I know that you should just be very careful about that. So anyone who comes along and says that, what it is they're afraid of a merge. And so invite them to your Halloween party, and then, I'm sorry, they're afraid of a join. So invite them to your Halloween party and dress as a join, and they'll be scared. So you can see we have two data sets. And let's just go over this really quickly. The first thing we want to do is we want to add new data to the table, and we want to update existing data if it's changed. So between these two data sets, without looking at the table names, I know you could look at them, how would you know, because this is a question that you might get in an interview, how would you know that the newer table has newer table without looking at the name? Like, how would you know that is more up-to-date data? Pause this video and try to answer the question on your own, and then I'll answer it. Okay, well, the dead giveaway is the fact that it has a more recent date right here. Okay, and that is a question that will come up. It's a very basic question, but it might come up in an interview. And I've actually heard that question in an interview. I've even asked someone that in an interview, and they weren't able to give me an answer. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Here's a date field. Like, what are you looking at? So it's important to understand, if you're looking at two data sets, this happens a lot in ETL. You have a new file, you had an existing file, which is the most recent file. You need to be able to know that. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to insert first into our existing table. Think of this as like our main table, and this is our staging table, but we're calling it old table and newer table. We want to insert into our old table where a value does not exist. I'm sorry, where a value exists in our newer table but doesn't exist in the old table. So you'll see the syntax here, and we're not inserting ID. The reason is because ID is auto-incrementing. We're going to insert into the old table the value and the value date from the new table where the ID is not in select ID from old table. So we're going to add to this table where the ID in this table doesn't exist in this table. I'm sorry, where it doesn't exist in this table, where the ID from this table doesn't exist in this table. Okay, so this is the syntax, and there are actually other ways of writing this. You could actually do an inner join here too. You could join from the old table and the new table, where the IDs match but where the values don't, and then do an insert on that way. But there's no reason, in my opinion, to do it that way. This is one way to do it. There's other ways. Go ahead and research them if you want. You'll notice, though, that the key here, and this is very important as an ETL developer or SQL Server developer in general, is that your ID field, that you have an identifying field or identifying column that you can separate new from old data. In this case, it's either ID or value date. But we can't always rely on value date. You may get multiple dates and multiple values that may all be correct. So that's where an ID field really comes in handy. So we're going to add to the table first. And you'll notice it looked in the old table and it said, okay, we only have one ID, but in the new table we have two IDs. So let's add to that old table from the new table where the ID is not in the old table, which is 2. So now we have C in our new table, which is correct, and ID of 2. So now we need to update our existing table because we noticed that in the newer set of data, value changed from A to B. And since this is the newest set of data, this is the most accurate, generally speaking. If you work for a company that says that's not true, then don't assume that. Only assume that if you know that's how it works, but that's generally how it works. So this is the insert. Now this is the update. So we're going to update the old table. And the syntax is we're going to set the old table.value equal to the newer table.value from the older table. And we're going to do, oh no, an inner join newer table on newer table.id equals old table.id. And notice this, newer table.value does not equal old table.value. Now some people would say, well, you could just do it this way. True. But I'm specifically updating one row. This is very handy to know because there will be updates that if you were to just do it the fast way, you could update rows that you shouldn't be updating. Okay? That's actually a very common mistake. I've seen people get fired for updating wrong data. So don't, realize that the more specific and the more precise you can be, the better for your job security. Okay. Now, I know a lot of people also say you could alias tables. Because you're new to this, don't worry about aliasing right now. You can worry about it in the long run, but for now, focus on the syntax. It's more important to understand the syntax and to not cry when you see an inner join, okay? Because when you go to that Halloween party, you don't want to be scared. You want them to be scared. Okay, so let's go ahead and update this, and we'll see that one row is affected. Can't talk. And there you go. Now the tables match. So I put this on GitHub, use it, play around with it, add new data to the table. In fact, if you go to the top of it, you'll see we're adding data. So add new data and see if you can get multiple, inserts, add some new values and play around. There's some functions here. So just play around with it. Get very familiar with it. Because again, like I said, most developers are gonna sit there and say, oh, you have to use merge. And I'm like, if you know these two, you're really ahead of the curve. And remember to always be precise. Cannot stress this enough. I've seen people get fired for not being precise. So always be precise on your inserts and your updates. That's going to minimize all kinds of problems for you in your career.